right. Hello, Titans. We're back with another installment of the Titan Table Talks. I'm Cecil Chik. I use she and they pronouns, and I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity within the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs here at Cal State Fullerton. I will serve as your moderator for today's talk. This dialogue is brought to you by our office, DIEP, in partnership with the Office of the President, Alumni Engagement, and Government Relations. But before we get started, here are a few logistical details for our program and tips to ensure that you're able to engage in today's dialogue. This event is being broadcasted on a Zoom webinar, so your cameras and microphones will be off the entire time. If you would like to engage with our panel or team behind the scenes, please use the Q&A function located in the menu bar below. This event is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DIEP YouTube channel with closed captioning available. At the very end of our dialogue, you will receive a feedback link to help improve this program, as well as provide ideas for future events. Today, our panelists will be engaging in a dialogue about empowerment in the LGBTQ+ community. Usually, President Virgie joins us live for some opening remarks. Unfortunately, today he wasn't able to make it, so will be coming to us through a pre-recorded message to kick off today's talk.
And welcome to Titan Table Talks, Empowering LGBTQ Communities. I want to begin by thanking our moderator and leader of our Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity programs, Dr. Cecil Chik, and her team in DIEP. I also want to thank our offices of Government Relations and Alumni Relations for their partnership. Then there's our amazing panelists today. Ahmad Zahra, Fullerton City Council member and small business owner. Ahmad, an honorary Titan, has participated in Cal State Fullerton's internship program, has worked with the film and theater department at Fullerton College, and has raised funds for student film projects to help aspiring local filmmakers and other students with opportunities to advance and gain valuable industry experience. And then there's Randolph Kimler. Randolph is a veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard and a Titan alum. Randolph was an early organizer of gay and lesbian students at Cal State Fullerton, and in 1976, he served as the president of the Gay Student Union. In 1986, he founded and served as the first chairperson of the Bishop's Commission on AIDS Ministries in the Diocese of Los Angeles, and served several terms on the board of directors of the National Episcopal AIDS Coalition. Randolph is also the founder of the Bishop's Commission on LGBT Ministries and gathering LGBTQ+ Episcopalians in active ministry. And also our amazing Nat Betancourt Arellano. Nat has served as the coordinator for Cal State Fullerton's LGBTQ Resource Center since June 2019 and is a Titan alum. As an alum, Nat enjoys being able to give back to the community that helped them grow. They have worked in first-year experience, career services, leadership development, residence life, and now diversity and equity. Nat, is there nothing you don't do? Nat previously served as a member for the NASPA Region 6 Advisory Board, and in 2021 was recognized as the Staff of the Year for the Division of Student Affairs at Cal State Fullerton. As someone that identifies as bisexual and non-binary, they hope that their narrative and their experiences here can positively impact others and be of support to students navigating their queer identities. And finally, Kayla Schneller, a two-time Titan alumna and former Titan staff member in the College of Business. Kayla now works for a consulting group that helps organizations increase self-awareness that leads to more effective communications, cohesiveness, and overall efficiency. Man, talk about empowerment. What a panel. I want to thank you all for everything you do and for being here at Titan Table Talks as we discuss empowering LGBTQ communities. You know, the theme of this year's Titan Table Talks series speaks directly to the panelists' personal experiences with overcoming systemic barriers and their stories of perseverance. By speaking from a lens of empowerment, our campus community will learn what kind of barriers the LGBTQ plus communities face, and also what the progression from marginalization to success can look like. As an institution, we can move from a place of acknowledgement of these barriers to a place of actual action through allyship and solidarity. At Cal State Fullerton, we accomplish this through the programs we offer and the resources we provide. Programs and resources like our LGBT Queer Resource Center, an amazing place, our annual Pride flag raising ceremony, our Queer Peers Mentoring Program, our Gender Affirming Closet, our Pride Alliance Faculty Staff Association, and our LGBTQ Ally Training, and on, and so many others. These are just some of the ways we support our LGBTQ plus communities, and we aim to be a beacon of LGBTQ pride, love, and inclusion at Cal State Fullerton. But as impactful as these programs and resources may be, and I really think they are, and as empowering as they may feel, and I know they feel empowering, we still know it's not enough. We must do more. We must speak out. We must speak up. We must act and continue to hold ourselves accountable. We must stand with our community. Another way we aim to empower our LGBTQ community on campus and show the world who we are is through our guiding principles for social justice that were developed in 2020. It was the first document of its kind in our history, and it's just as important to us today as it was when we put it together in 2020. It's just as important as our university-wide strategic plan, our physical master plan, our GI 2025 benchmarks, or any other foundational blueprint that we look to as a guiding light for our future of who we want to be and where we want to stand. You've heard me share these 6 principles in many of the speeches that I've given to you since we first introduced them. But I continue to be drawn to the statement in the document that comes just after we list the 6 principles. Here's what it says. It says, to be an actively inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist campus, we must engage in transformative intersectional work with, among, and between the various communities that are consistently relegated to the margins of our society. We cannot separate the conversation between racial justice and justice for all marginalized groups when the oppression and liberation, they are interconnected. Instead, we must step back, examine, and discuss the historical parallels of racial justice and other human rights movements, such as the immigration movement and the LGBTQ plus movements. And that's a portion of what today is about. Stepping back, examining, celebrating, and discussing what we have achieved so far, for sure, but also examining, discussing, and planning how we can do more as we move forward. And in doing so, we recognize that throughout this pandemic, our support of our LGBTQ plus communities has been and must always be interconnected with our stance for Black lives, our protection against Asian hate, our advocacy for immigrant rights, our efforts to eradicate the digital divide, and all our efforts to relieve the historic injustices that were exponentially exacerbated during the pandemic. That is why at Cal State Fullerton, we continue to seek to embed our social justice principles in every division and at every college and as a guide for our decision-making process. To ask ourselves at each step, will our actions enhance equitable learning? Will it expand intentional outreach? Will our actions amplify our HSI designation and radiate an identity of inclusion? Will our decisions build a professoriate to leadership pipeline, recognize the history and catalyze change in our campus and create a truly anti-racist community? And that is why, in upholding these principles, we seek to combine our racial justice efforts with our work to eradicate inequities for our LGBT communities and for all marginalized groups. Although we've made some good progress, and we must not rest on that progress. We have to continue to identify barriers and eradicate them in every corner of this campus, in every corner of our community, in every corner of our state and nation. As I shared at convocation earlier this month, we must be our students' navigators and ensure that all students feel welcomed and part of the Titan family. No student should have to overcome the subterranean systems of oppression and privilege that are so deeply rooted in this country. Instead, we must continuously do more to eradicate these systems and enhance equity for all Titans so that every student feels empowered and every student is equipped to empower others. I have to tell you, I am so honored to do this work with you, share this journey with you, and once again celebrate LGBTQ History Month with all of you. Thank you for making the time to be here. Enjoy this amazing panel. I'm really looking forward to listening to them. And go Titans, as always.
All right. Thank you, President Burgess, for sharing your words with us today and kicking off our dialogue. Despite not being able to be with us live, I appreciate him taking the time to record his remarks for today's table talk. And now I'd like to introduce our panel of guests for today, who are very excited and to start this conversation and journey in empowerment. First up, we have Ahmad Zahra, using he, him, and his pronouns, who serve as the council member for the city of Fullerton. We also have Nat Betancourt Arellano today, they and them pronouns, who serves as the coordinator for the LGBTQ Resource Center here at Cal State Fullerton. We also have Kayla Schneller, she and her pronouns, who is a Cal State Fullerton alumna and currently works at a consulting group that helps teams and organizations increase self-awareness that lead to more effective communication, productivity, and team cohesiveness. We also have one more panelist that may be joining us today, Randolph Kimler, he and him pronouns, who's the veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard and alumni of Cal State Fullerton. They are experiencing some technical difficulties, so hopefully they will join us soon. So without further ado, I'd like to ask our panelists to maybe turn on their cameras and we can get today's dialogue started. Hello. There we go. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to share in this space with us. So we did some introductions, but I wanted to start with just a very foundational blanket question that maybe we can use to build our conversation today. How would you personally define empowerment? What does that mean to you in your personal and professional life?
Should I go ahead and start?
Yeah, go ahead, Ahmad.
My name is Ahmad Zahra. I currently serve as a council member here in the city of Fullerton, and I'm proud to be an honorary Titan. And thank you, President Burgess, for that, for those kind remarks. And thank you for the Titan Table Talk team for hosting this. Empowerment to me is being able to be oneself. I think that's important, and it's important for us to recognize that within ourselves and not to be afraid of being who we are and showing not only our abilities but also our humanity. I think that is important. That's how I've led my life, and I'll be able to share a little bit of that more as we continue this discussion, but that is really, for me, what empowerment means.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to add on to that. Hi, folks. My name is Nat Betancourt Arellano. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the senior coordinator for the LGBT Queer Resource Center here on campus, and also an alum of Cal State Fullerton. Graduated 2015 College of Communications. So for me, what empowerment means, similarly to Ahmad, that really that sense of being able to be your most authentic self, and particularly not having fear in that. And there's certainly a lot of fear that can come with, these various identities. But if you yourself, as an individual, can feel so immensely empowered in who you are, the joy that you feel when you get to express yourself, but but also knowing, your values. And especially going back to, Ahmad, you mentioned the humility piece or humanity piece. And so I think it also comes with, being able to connect with folks and understand, their experiences, and find that commonality with that shared community and connection. Because as much as self-empowerment is so important, so is a larger community. And I think that's especially true for the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kayla. I use she, her pronouns. Nat, I love that being yourself authentically and showing up when you can authentically is probably the most empowering feeling. I think for me, it's also just the ability to be able to make decisions for myself. Having that autonomy to do so and independence is something that I really, really have valued, even as a young child, I think growing up too, and being a woman in general, with, just everything going on. It's important to remember that, yes, we do have, like Nat said, that self-empowerment, but also, how are we empowered by our communities around us and the people around us, whether that's family, friends, chosen family, but then even in the grand scheme of things too, institutional powers and systemic changes. I know that we'll dive into that a little bit, but having the power in that sense to be able to, again, make decisions for ourselves, both in and out of the home, and in public and professional settings as well. That's something that's really, really important to me when it comes to empowerment.
Yeah, so I appreciate that every one of your responses lean into this idea of community empowerment, right? Like in our first dialogue, if you joined us last week, right, there was a lot of conversation about self-empowerment, but I'm hearing a lot of, well, it's not just me, right? How do I ensure that my community feels empowered, but that I'm also empowering my community? So can you talk to me a little bit about like, where that's coming from, right? Why is this such an important focal point as you think about your own definition of empowerment? Why is community empowerment so powerful?
I guess we'll start with me again. But when I ran for council back in 2018 for the first time, I just ran because I recognized in the neighborhoods of South Fulton that I lived in for 21 years, there wasn't really much attention. We had a growing poverty. We had a Hispanic community that didn't have access properly to local government. And we had a high number of, or increasing number of renters, I'm one of them, who were beginning to start feeling the pressure of housing. These are all issues that connect all of us together. And by recognizing what my neighbors were going through, I was able to not only obviously win the election, but also I was able to connect with people that may not have necessarily connected with me on the LGBT experiences that I've had, but we connected on something meaningful for all of us. And I think that's really important. Then, and I'll tell you, there were people who I probably would not have connected with if I hadn't found that commonality. And later on, I was able to change people's opinions on what it means to be LGBT by opening that door and then suddenly being able to share my own experiences because now people were listening. And I think it's really important to find those common aspects, the common struggles that we all have in our daily life. And those become the things that will open the doors to more dialogue and then ultimately acceptance, because now we're all moving forward together. And it doesn't matter if we're brown, black, LGBTQ, or wherever we come from, what our religions are. Then it becomes now about our day-to-day life and the struggles of how do we make our neighborhoods better and how do we live together as a community. And I think that's really the most important thing, I think.
I guess I could jump in here again as well. But I'm thinking to Ahmad of the commonality piece, that you're mentioning. Because when I think of, I guess, my own sort of empowerment and my journey and connection, it was finding that commonality with people in the community, the people that I had never met before or had seen myself in before. And a lot of that happened too when I actually came to Cal State Fullerton. When I was a student here, the coordinator at the time, Bree Serrano, who is currently over at Dominguez Hills, was the first person that was both Latina and non-binary and bisexual that I felt like I connected with. And part of it was that commonality of the shared experiences, because I hadn't seen that anywhere else before, not in my communities. I grew up in a very suburban, sort of predominantly white religious community. And so there was a lot of these messages that I was, as a young person, that I was getting of, these are the only ways that you can be. And so to finally find someone or see someone that was in a way modeling a whole different experience that I had always felt inside of me that I wanted, but couldn't ever really actualize into either words or even like kind of imagine for myself. Being able to see that when I came to the university was so impactful. And now I take part of that, I look at in two ways. Of one, okay, how can I, as a queer and trans person, also model that authenticity, that empowerment for people within my community? But also, how can I model that for folks outside of the community? Because I'm thinking again of that commonality piece. And I think as an educator, what I love is to get people thinking about, how do they navigate their sexuality? What is their relationship with gender? And, we might find a little commonality of, hey, I never thought about, maybe I am attracted to people of another sex, or, hey, I never thought about my gender being different or experiencing it in a different way. And but once you have those discussions and conversations about that commonality, it really kind of opens up into this newer experience. And that's what I really enjoy, about being able to have these conversations, because that is the beginning parts of feeling empowered. Because if someone wasn't open enough to talk with me about their gender experience, I don't know if I would be able to come in fully into my own gender experience now. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, community is survival. It really is. There are powers in numbers, that common phrase, and it's so true. I look at the people who fought before us, community. They found, community in an underground scene. I think of ballroom culture and that community, and like, without it, how could you have possibly survived? I think being queer and just being a part of the LGBT community in the society that we live in can sometimes, depending on where you are and who you're around, can be very isolating. And so how do we find community? And then what type of community are we looking for? Where can we find it? And I think the beauty of higher education is being able to provide students with a community that they may not necessarily have access to at home or outside of the university. So for me, community is just being able to find those people who you can call your people, that you have fun with, that you feel love and support by. As human beings, that's all we really want. You could be the biggest introvert out there, but deep down, you want to feel that connection, whether it's one person or with a larger crowd. Having that community, there's no rules to it too, I think. Community can mean whatever it means to you. And if that's having two people right by your side the entire time, or whether that's having a group that you meet with weekly or monthly at the university, I think that, again, community is survival, and that alone helps to find empowerment within yourself. Obviously, it can come from deep within. And I think for some people, and especially me, like it's something that, again, I really, really value that self aspect of it. But again, I couldn't do any of it without a community and the people who fought before us too. So I think community is a really, really important piece when it comes to the LGBT larger community.
Yeah, thank you. So as folks were talking, I jotted down some things that I think were kind of like maybe foundational terms when we talk about like community empowerment. Like I heard finding safety, right, in common barriers, right? Knowing that being able to find representation, right? Role modeling that behavior, but then transforming that into being a good ally, a good ambassador, a good educator for your community as well, right? While at the same time honoring our history, right? Knowing that those who came before us allows me to be here, right? So I kind of appreciate how Kayla ended us with like, oh, we're talking about a chosen family, right? When we talk about our community, we're talking about our chosen family. And it's a term that pops up in LGBT communities a lot, right? Like we have our family, right? We have our blood family, the people that we're born with, that like, yeah, that's my cousin, that's my sister, it's my mom and dad. But then we have this idea of a chosen family, right? And for me, I think that's what I'm hearing you talk about. That's that community empowerment, right? Knowing that there are people that got your back, that share your similar experiences and are there for you and being your ally, being your advocate, being your role model along the way. So with all of that, right, my next question kind of centers that a little bit, right? What are some life lessons, right, that you have picked up as an individual navigating your personal and professional journey as an LGBT individual, right? How has that shaped your perspective on what empowerment means and what's that's been like for you to experience? So we can start with Kayla. I think Kayla's ready.
Yeah, I'm always ready. Yeah, I think so. Sorry, repeat the question one more time. Just want to make sure I got a good grasp of it.
Yeah, how has like your personal and professional like life, what are some like life lessons that you have learned that shape your perspective on empowerment?
Yeah, so life lessons for me is that you're going to have to come out every single day. For me personally, I am a femme presenting cisgendered woman. I identify as bisexual. I am married to a woman recently, so that's been very exciting and empowering that I was able to make that decision in a state that allowed me to, and had a community that was just very beautiful. But coming out every day, it's rough. I never really thought when we talk about this coming out experience, it's usually like a one-time event. Like that's really the discourse around coming out. Like, when did you come out? I'm like, I came out yesterday to the male person outside, So for me, that's been a really big life lesson. And I'm not going to lie, I want to be transparent in that it does make me nervous in some situations. Like, if I have good rapport with someone in the professional world, and then I, come out and mention, if, my wife slips out in a sentence, are they going to change their perception of me? Is this going to affect my working relationship? Which I'm not saying is a good thing, right? That's obviously awful and it doesn't feel good to me. And I am someone who's very proud of my identity, and here I'm sharing it with all of you. But I think that one of the biggest life lessons for me is that just kind of being prepared, in that coming out is an ongoing journey for me. And I don't have to necessarily be afraid, but I think it's just being more aware, and my safety and the risk that sometimes it can take when I'm with my partner, especially too. We have to be aware of our environment, where we are, who we're talking to. So that's been kind of a harsh life lesson, but now that I know to expect it, I go in with it and I understand. And I've had very validating people in my community who've also maybe shared with it, or had the complete opposite experience, where they had that one-time event, and then from there it was a rather linear journey. But I think for me, definitely that was a life lesson that transpired out of my personal into the professional world, and then back and forth even. So yeah.
Yeah, I would say, kind of to go off of what Kelly mentioned about, having to come out consistently or constantly. I think as a trans person, as someone I'm non-binary and trans-masculine, so I present myself or show up very masculine, often misgendered as a man. But I'm also misgendered as a woman as well, because my body type and shape, people make assumptions. And so I'm constantly having to think about how I show up in the world, because literally just me being present is coming out for many folks. And so I have to navigate, how do I carry myself? How do I speak? My mannerisms, even, because I'm never sure. I'm never sure if someone is going to feel threatened by me, or to feel fearful of me. And at times I am fearful. But I also know that by being my most authentic self, by presenting the way that I do, by dressing how I do, and getting great haircuts like I do, there's a young person out there that is seeing me and is feeling empowered by that. And that for me just really outweighs whatever fear I could have. When I was a younger person, I was an introvert, very quiet, very shy. Most people wouldn't believe that now. But that's because of the empowerment that I've had, that I feel so confident in who I am, that I will not shy away for anyone to diminish that. But it can still be scary. And so a lot of that lesson for me is, how do I still show up the way that I want to show up, but also how do I find safety? And a lot of that is, my chosen family, my people. A lot of that is, what profession do I choose to go in? In higher education is pretty open, so I'm okay here. Where do I want to live? Well, I've lived in other places, but California seems like, a good space for me to continue to exist. And so it's those longer term decisions that I now also have to consider. And now I also have to consider them as someone that plans to be a parent. How will this impact my family? How will this impact children? And navigating, my trans identity and the world, and my child growing up with a trans parent, and also having to navigate their own conversations. What is that going to look like? And so I think by the empowerment that I have had, that's really helped me to feel more confident, in being able to go through life in this way. But yeah.
Well, Kayla mentioned the word survival. And I think that's a very important word, and it was part of my journey for sure. I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Syria. I came here at the age of 26. I'm a bit older than all of the folks here in this panel and watching. I remember, I'm getting little flashbacks here. I remember when I was a kid, I was a teenager, well, actually almost coming of age, during the 80s, when AIDS was surging and becoming a thing. And I remember everything that I kind of was getting was that if you are gay, you're going to get AIDS. That was what, and there was no obviously educational programs, obviously in Syria, it's still prison penalties and cultural suicide, if not endangering one's life. There is no thing called acceptance. Even today, it's very difficult. And I grew up terrified, thinking, oh wow, I'm gay, and I'll trust me, I've known I was gay since I was like 5. So I had to educate myself. I had to, stay quiet not really talk about myself or any of my fears, and then just kind of survive that environment until one day I had the opportunity to leave and come to the United States. And people ask me, why did you come here? And it's really truly one word, which is freedom. And it's the freedom to do what you want to do and to be who you are. Now, here, it's interesting because I came in, I always thought I was like, one generation, 10 years ahead of the curve, just 10 years. I missed the all the empowerment that's going on right now. But, I found that, wow, it's not as bad as Syria, but there are people still dying and being killed for being gay. I mean, this is the 80s and 90s, right? Early 2000s. Hate crime was, it still is a thing. And I always believed that it's one thing to accept oneself and to understand that there's nothing wrong with us, because I grew up with a lot of friends who literally were so ashamed of being gay. Like, they wanted to change. I remember having this big argument with a friend of mine, very close friend, who said if there was a pill that he could take to change himself and be straight, he would take it. I mean, these are the struggles, right? I never thought there was a problem with me. I always thought the problem was society. And so for me, it wasn't about changing myself. It was about trying to change how people see me and the society that I'm living in. And here, maybe I couldn't do that in Syria yet, but I can certainly do it here, because here we have those opportunities. We have the ability to make changes. Very difficult and sometimes with setbacks, but we can do that. And again, I'm going to take you back to a journey, to a moment where you may not all remember. In 2008, when we all celebrated Barack Obama's win, I certainly did. And it was the year I became a president, and the first vote I ever took. Became citizen. Did I say president? Freudian slip. No, but and it was my first vote for ever. But yet here in California, we had Prop 8 that took us back and denied marriage equality. When the campaigning was happening against, in favor of Prop 8 against marriage equality, it was here in Fulton. I was in Fullerton. And I remember there was so many signs everywhere. It was almost like the Harbor Boulevard was plastered, almost like a parade, with all these, pro Prop 8, anti-marriage equality signs. And I remember going to city councils and fighting this and saying, it's public property. They can't put these campaign signs. It's against city ordinances. And I kept fighting with the city council back then. They didn't take them down, obviously, but but I think that was kind of my first into that there's changes that need to be done within our own communities, even here. But that kind of put me on a path there. And then 10 years later, I got elected to the Fulton City Council. And my first year, we raised pride flag. And so that was a big, only on a 3-2 vote. So it was a tough one. And it almost was brought down in 2020, but we fought, we kept it up there. And the reason is because, again, it's a signal, it's a message that we are not invisible. There's nothing wrong with us. And this is a message that we need to start changing society. Society needs to change. It's not just about tolerance. It's about acceptance, and it's about being neighborly as well. So, and I'll leave you with this. When we raised the pride flag in 2019, there was a mom that came to the ceremony that we did, and she was in tears. She brought her teen a kid who was LGBT. And while she was crying, he was smiling. He was giddy. And to me, that is empowerment. A child that was bullied in school looked up and said, hey, there's someone looking out for me. And so for me, that sort of brought it home from that kid who watched TV in the 80s and thought he was going to die any minute because of AIDS, to the moment where I'm hoping I changed the perspective of one child here in Fullerton, at least.
Wow. Right? These are some powerful life lessons. Right? All I asked was, what are some life lessons you learned? Right? Like, and what came up, right, was Kayla started talking about the need to come out every day. Right. And then I think the theme then that kind of went from there was this idea of safety. Right. This idea of coming out every day, safety, coming back into how do I overcome my fears to ensure that that teenage child or that kid who's in elementary, middle school feels the ability, feels empowered, right, to be them. So my next question kind of goes along with what we were just talking about. In those moments where you have felt disempowered, right? How did you overcome that? What were the things that you did or that you had around you, surrounding you, that help you overcome this feeling of being disempowered, be it in an interpersonal or a societal way? What helped you in that journey?
I'm happy to jump in for this one because I suddenly got a little on fire about it. But for me, I think it is there are the times constantly, where I'm just like, here we go again, whether it's a message or a story in the news or a new piece of legislation or someone, losing another member of our community. There are consistently those moments, especially in my role, where I'm having to confront hopelessness in a sense. And I tell my students this all the time, how important it is to have hope and to recognize joy. The joy that we have in ourselves, the joy that we have in our communities, and that is what matters. And there are many times where I think I really just go back to my values and how I grew up, just knowing that love exists and persists, that community will always be there to support you, and just that things don't have to be this way. And that's really, I think, what guides me and keeps me going, is that it doesn't have to be this way. I have dreamed and imagined a future that is different than our present. And for me and my values, that's what I'm going to stick to. I'm going to continue to persist and be resistant to, whatever sense of hate that might come through. And I recognize that that's not for everyone. I absolutely know that. But I do hope that, as folks go on their journey, they can find those little bits of hope, those little bits of joy. And over time, they can grow. And over time, you can find something to dispel that hopelessness and still see that future, that vision of what your life could really be. And so that's something for me that's really helpful.
I'll go as well, but I got involved in politics, which is quite interesting. I've seen hate firsthand growing up, and I see it now again still, as someone is in the front, and you know, I when you're elected, you lose your ability even to block people on Facebook. Just let you know that. So I lost a little bit of my freedom to do that, but you know, hate still exists, and it's very discouraging sometimes. There are times when you kind of want to just hide, but then you put on a song and put some 80s rock, and you stand up again and go out and fight some more. We're always going to experience all kinds of reactions from people. What's important is none of it should discourage us from being ourselves or discourage us from moving forward where we want to go. It's really important that we find any ways or people around us who are supportive and will give you a hug when you need it, and then go for a walk with people that you trust, and cuddle your cat. Got 4. Because what we are often faced are things that are different than what other people may face, and it very, very unique in the sense. And you know, even Nat, you were talking about how you dress and all of those things. These are daily struggles that could get to you over time. And so really just look at the mirror every day and say, hey, we got this. Keep going.
I think for me, in moments where I have felt disempowered, I really go back to my education. I am so grateful and privileged to have had the education that I had, particularly speaking in higher education. In 2017, I was part of the communications department with my bachelor's, and then recently graduated this year with my master's in human communication studies. And I particularly looked at critical communication. And so even when there are moments where I am faced with maybe, you know, people who aren't approving or even hate, I've taken a different approach to looking at it. While I don't condone it, and it's obviously very hurtful to me, I try to reflect and think of how society has really affected all of us, even the people that have this hatred, right? I don't believe that anybody is born as a hateful person. It's all how we're socialized and how culturally and society impacts that. And so even when I'm really, really frustrated and angry at times, I try to think back that society is affecting these people just as much as it's affecting me and the way I'm growing up, whether it's heteronormativity, like that is so ingrained in everything. I read a quote the other day that's like, you never are more aware of your queerness until you plan a wedding. I can't find any Mrs. and Mrs. buttons anywhere. I have to buy 2 packs of each, to celebrate this. And so even then it's like, tapping into the networks that allow us to critically examine the way things are happening. And so when I have felt maybe disadvantaged in a situation because of my identity, or just being, again, a woman in general and a queer woman and a Latina that I identify with, there are moments where people are going to push back and they are going to make you feel small, and they're going to try to make you just feel a way that is, again, disempowering. And I think having the confidence to look at my education and what I studied and being able to say, no, I do matter here. And even though these institutions and the way things are working may not back me up, I know that I can push back on them, that they are constructs that are created. They're not set in stone, and not dreaming about a future that is completely different. It is totally possible. And I hope we see it in our lifetime. But it's, again, like, these aren't just ideas that have to be dreams, right? Like, they are ideas that can become reality, and maybe they're already realities for some people, which is awesome. But yeah, be grateful with the education that you have, and allow yourself to critically think what's happening, what's going on, and are those people just as subject to what society is demanding of them as we are? And that has really changed my values. So, little plug for the Human Communications Department. Take a critical communications class, you won't regret it. But yeah, definitely in moments of disempowered, relying back on my education.
Thank you. So I'm hearing, right, like we've taken a journey so far in the past, like, hour we've been together. I'm hearing folks talk about, like, in moments where you feel disempowered, right? What pushes you forward is this idea of hope, right? This idea of being able to persist and resist, right? Because of those who come after you, and for those who come, because of those before you, and because of those who come after you, right? I also heard kind of this aspect of self-care, right? Leaning into community. So I kind of wanted to, I have two more questions. And if you're in the audience and you have a question, please make sure to use the Q&A, because we're going to get to those questions in a little bit. So in these moments, right, like, because it's, this idea of survival, right? This idea of coming out every day, but then knowing that the journey that you are taking is paving the way for others, just like how those have paved a way for you. How do you exercise self-care? How do you pause and take care of yourself in this journey of trailblazing, but knowing, right, that you too are part of this community, that you too are taking in and having to think through survival, what I put on today, who I see, what is showing up on my social media, just trying to get a Mrs. and Mrs. button together, right? Like, how do you exercise self-care?
Well, for me, I love my 80s and 90s TV shows, sitcoms. And I always find a TV show that I grew up with, and I watch it, I binge watch it, because, Golden Girls is one of my favorite. I've been watching that since the 80s, since it actually came out. And every time I see it, every generation, it means something different. Now I'm almost a Golden Girl myself. But, really surrounding yourselves with people who are just truly and genuinely loving, and that with no expectations. That's important. We're out there in the world and everybody wants something, but it's those people who don't want anything other than just to be loving. I think that those are the people that you need to cling on to and keep them in your inner circle. And I love my pets. Say it again.
I think for me, I'd love to just go back very briefly to what Kayla was saying about, recognizing how folks are socialized. I think that's so important. And I mention that because I think that is also something that I really take into consideration, even when I'm thinking about my own self-care. Because a part of my self-care is also being able to be patient. It's being able to be compassionate. And it's being able to create a space or an environment that I feel comfortable in. And so part of that is my physical environment. So they got the background up now, but if you came to my office, you'd see it's very colorful. There's a lot of knickknacks and things around, but it very much speaks to my personality. And I do that because, I spend so much time here. And I love it, but I also want to feel comfortable here. And I want my students to feel comfortable too. And so I feel like if I'm able to share, a little bit of myself, that's not just overly, about being queer and trans, that really helps to open up that sense of comfort and trust and connection. And so being able to find that comfort is helpful because I certainly feel like I'm able to take better care of myself. I am able to recognize when I need time, to just either recuperate or recharge. And so doing that in a physical environment, but also a community environment, with my friends and my family, getting to enjoy. Kayla is actually a dear friend of mine, so getting to go to queer weddings is always fantastic, and so being able to just spend those moments together, I think, is important because over the years we've lost so many folks that have lost out on time and memories and moments, and so I'm going to cherish the moments as much as I can.
Yes, cherishing those moments for sure. For me, self-care is doing what I want when I want and not letting people stop me. I love hobbies and I have passions and I want to be able to do those as myself, showing up authentically and how I do that. I love plants and being a part of the indoor plant community. I love my dog, being able to be part of the community who puts sweaters on their dogs, right? Being able to participate in these things as authentically as I can without feeling the pressure that my identity can bring sometimes, because there's always going to be pressure, I think, whether it's from outside sources or just internally too, that puts a damper on your self-care. And that brought up something important, I think, is that self-awareness piece, and just being emotionally intelligent. How can I be in tune with my emotions and how can I manage those emotions in a productive way? And then even being able to read the room is super important too. Being able to manage and regulate those emotions of the others around you is super important. And I don't think we really talk about emotional intelligence really at all in like any space. I think it's definitely ramping up in popularity, but that has a big piece and contributor of self-care, being able to understand what you're feeling, being able to manage that. I'm someone who feels a lot of feelings all the time, as maybe you can see. I don't know, this excitement that I'm feeling right now, but being able to express that, and again, just being free in that sense, being able to enjoy life. And I think, and I hope that everybody finds a way to enjoy life, because we spend so many years on this earth, so many, and not being able to enjoy that time is just going to really affect the way we look at life. And just to know that joy looks differently for each person, and not having judgment to what brings people joy, whether it's people in the community or people out of the community. We all have very different lives. We all have very different realities, and we don't look at the world the same way. And so there's going to be some differences in how we practice self-care and how we look at joy. And so just really being open-minded, and realizing that for everybody involved.
Whew. All right, so ready? This is what I got. You let me know if I'm right. So I asked you all, like, how do you take care of yourself? And to me, what it sounds like was universally the response is being unapologetically yourself. Right? Like I heard a lot of, I'm gonna maintain my physical space. I'm gonna disconnect. And if tonight is the night I binge Golden Girls, then tonight is the night I watch Golden Girls, right? Just kind of coming back to your true and authentic self and taking care of yourself holistically, right? And being able to know that about yourself, right? Is this a time for me to watch TV, or is this a time for me to be in community? Right? So that those different aspects of self-care. So we had a couple of questions that popped into the Q&A. So I'm going to go through them, and then we'll see where life takes us. All right. So this question is specifically for Nat. Somebody in the audience shared that they are a cisgendered female, identifies as a lesbian, but they have shaved their head because that is how they like it and dress for comfort more than anything else, which is pants, shorts, t-shirts mostly, but they get misgendered often. And mostly because of the hairstyle. So how do you deal with the person who calls you sir? Sometimes I try and be funny, but it kind of gets annoying.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll be honest, oftentimes I have to analyze what kind of situation I'm in. Many times when I am misgendered, it's a very quick exchange, where it's like, oh, excuse me, sir. And, then they're gone, enough. And they just believe that they've engaged with a man, and that was untrue. And so there are the moments where I have to consider, okay, if I spoke up, what would that mean and what would happen? But also, if I don't speak up, what does that mean and what happens? Because there's pros and cons, there's all the which ways, but it's also about, how much are you willing to just let things go, but also to speak up. And it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle between when do I, amplify my voice and when do I let it go. In the moments that I do amplify, I try and be, again, compassionate. I really try to just say, hey, friend, I actually use they, them pronouns, or I'm a non-binary person. And, from there, maybe a conversation will happen. Maybe from there, it's just okay, and they move on or they disregard or whatever. But it really is having to figure out, in terms of safety, and in terms of power, even, what can I say in those situations? So I don't necessarily have a good cookie cutter example for every situation, because it really is individualistic. It really is up to the individual. These journeys are so individual. So as you feel empowered to share with people that, hey, I'm not a man, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a woman, then you will continue to feel empowered to share that. And over time, those decisions between speaking up and not speaking up will become fewer, and you will feel much more confident to say, exactly what you want to say in those moments. But it does take time.
Can I
Yeah.
say something on that as well?
Sure. Yeah.
And Nat, you're absolutely right. It really is depending on the situation, and sometimes it is best to just let it go because it may just be an error, or not a moment to engage. But I think there are moments where one can use this as an educational moment as well. And I'll tell you something. The funny thing is, people mistake me as straight for some reason, and I don't know why. And I had this one conversation with, I'm running for re-election, so I'm knocking doors, and I talked to a lot of people. And one lady was complaining about education and LGBT education in schools and this and that. Now, city council doesn't really have much to do with it, but she went on and on and on and on and on. And she wanted to know my opinion. Well, my opinion was one word. Well, I'm gay. And it was a big shocker. She didn't expect that answer. But it didn't, then it opened up, and I told her I seem like a very open-minded person, so let me give you my opinion on all of this. By the end of the conversation, I don't know if I won her over or anything, but she listened. And that was a moment where I could find that is educational. And I think these moments pop up, and if you find a moment like this, make sure you educate people. And it's important for people to understand our experiences, because you never know whose mind you'll change.
Yeah. Okay, so we have another question that came in that is interested in knowing, can you share an example of a formal healthcare exchange, be it medical or mental health, that felt empowering? How can we encourage healthcare professionals to be effective allies? I don't know if I should be concerned that the silence means you haven't had one.
That was kind of part of my answer.
I'll share something. Again, having lived longer than most here, I've experienced things differently. So in the past, obviously, going to a doctor was different than what it is now. I think a lot of in the healthcare profession has changed and has become a little bit more open. Certainly, the medical institutions at large, and the hospitals and the large medical facilities have changed their strategies and change their policies about LGBTQ. But I think it's important to educate our healthcare professionals because not everybody understands the total experience. And I think it's important to be as open as possible. And if you're uncomfortable, and trust me, I have been in situations where I was uncomfortable and I just requested someone else. And so I think you have to be comfortable, and the physician, the healthcare provider should also be understanding and non-judgmental. And if you feel any doubt there, I think it's important to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it comes to the empowerment piece, I think you brought up a really important part of that is when you don't feel accepted, whether it's in therapy or counseling or just your gynecologist, your doctor, right? In any sense, to speak up and ask for a different provider. You have the right to do that, educating yourself on your right, just saying, hey, I didn't really vibe with that therapist. I would like a new therapist. And it's as simple as that. When it comes internally, it's going to bring anxiety. It's going to bring maybe a little bit of being afraid, but people do it all the time. People change providers all the time. People change therapists depending on, the care that they're receiving and vice versa. And then to kind of go back to the question as far as how do we educate? It's all about education. Like, people can be educated in their specific right, being a doctor and what they're studying in school and everything, but are they culturally aware? Are they culturally sensitive to these things? Tapping into their unconscious bias, right? What are the biases that they have as a healthcare professional that's not allowing them to see just straight up human bodies, right? In the aspect of healthcare, right? Like in the aspect of mental health, our brains are, how they're wired and everything, and being able to separate or not even separate, but rather consider the different experiences and everything that people are having in combination with being able to look at their bodies in a professional way and observe their mental health and everything. So professional development, personal development, growth, and all of that never stops. If you think you are educated and you have your doctorate, and that is fantastic, and you have a lot of education on your belt, there is no shortage of education that you can possibly learn, right? There always is going to be something that maybe you didn't look at. Maybe it was just a perspective that nobody had brought to you in years of being on this earth, right? So perspective and education. And how do we do that? I don't know. Maybe it's policy. Maybe it's just advocating. Maybe it's protests, right? Where do we have to go? Where do we have to bring our bodies and put us out on the front lines for those of us who can it safely, right? So I think there's so many answers to that question. But in a nutshell, it's going to come down to being able to educate these educators, right? And these in the professional sense as well.
And I'd say, just to add on there, it's also important that, as much as LGBTQ individual can feel empowered to advocate for themselves, it's all, and share about who they are, it's also so important for healthcare providers to also share about their knowledge and who they are, showcasing that they are an inclusive LGBTQ affirming practice at the forefront, of their front door. That is great, because that is going to allow for an individual to feel more empowered to be able to share about their sexual experiences, about their gender identity. And then to also, to encourage healthcare providers to be knowledgeable about pronouns and the importance of pronouns, and to be knowledgeable about names other than legal names is also important, because those are just small signs of an open door that an individual can say, hey, you know what, they asked me what my pronouns were, and I was able to share with them honestly. Maybe I can also talk to them about my sexual orientation or my intersex experience, or my gender identity, all of those different things. So it's important to really be cognizant of the experience of LGBTQ folks.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that we have our additional panelists that just joined us. Randolph? Hello. Oh, you're on mute. Do you know how to, on the bottom left corner? Oh, there we go.
There we go. So I really apologize. We've been working together now for almost an hour to get me on. This is what happens with old people. I'm telling you, it's ridiculous. So it's very sad. And I'm so sorry to have missed the other people's talks also. So yeah, but here I am.
Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to get on here. So we're kind of doing the Q&A portion. We have some questions that came in the chat. Feel free to chime in and introduce yourself at any time, and we'll kind of go for the last like 15 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you. So we have a question that came in that's for the whole panel, and the participant shares, I identify as a bisexual woman who is in a long-term relationship with a man. I feel like I'm privileged to be in a heteronormative relationship, and it feels like my identity isn't questioned. Sometimes, though, I don't feel comfortable identifying as queer and have trouble going to events or being active in the community. What can I do to help my community and feel more comfortable with my own identity?
I'd love to jump in on this one. Thank you so much for that question. It's super important, and know that, and this might be for everyone who's not really aware of the biases that happen within our own community too, right? Our queerness does not absolve the racist, misogynist, right? Discounting of bisexuals in general. So as I identify as well as a bisexual woman, and just knowing that you are valid, like your experiences and your desires and your wants and your attractions to people is completely valid. And really, it's educating our own community that you don't have to be completely on one side or the other of the spectrum when it comes to it, even if you are with a partner who is of one gender or the other, or one sexual identity of the other. So this is where the empowerment piece comes in, and it's hard because you're also trying to educate others around you. But I say just show up to that event, wear your purple and your blue and your pink flag, your t-shirts, like I'm bisexual and I matter. I'm with a man and I am still bisexual, right? I'm with a woman and I'm still bisexual. Like restate that to yourself, reaffirm it to yourself, because you are valid. And there's also just, again, going back to all these societal constructs and these barriers that we have within the community and outside of the community, when it comes to especially like monogamy and how we look at relationships and sexual identity and relationships just as we form, right? This is like the sexual communication aspect of how we need to educate people, right? There are so many ways in identifying and feeling it, but you're valid and the community needs to understand that and just know that there are fellow bisexuals who also experience the same exact problem every time. And you might get, you know, a comment or so that says you're not gay enough or that you're not straight enough. And you're like, I'm living on this spectrum here and this is where I am. And if you don't like where my little dot is on this line, like, then I don't know really what to do for you, right? It's about educating yourself, educating others, and just know not everyone's going to vibe with it, right? Not everyone's going to accept it, but show up. That's the best that we can do, because if us bisexuals are hiding and we don't show our flags and we don't show up, people are just going to reaffirm that we don't belong in that space. And so just know that you are valid. You need to show up. I will be right alongside with you. Just let me know when the next event is and I will be there.
Thank you, Kayla. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that I think it's important, since you do have a spouse, that you share this with your spouse and be honest, because I think there needs to be also some support system that you have. And certainly there are groups available at LGBT centers that you can communicate with and find some support there.
Last thing I was just going to mention is, you know, if you might want to take a read of the Bisexual Manifesto, my students really enjoy some of those documents, which really talks about, you know, of course, the biphobia that exists within the community and outside of the community, and as well as when you just brush away, you know, people's experiences, discount people's experiences. You know, it being with someone of, you know, a similar sex or not does not discount your attraction, does not discount your sexual feelings and or who you feel that you are. So even for folks that might say that, you know, they've never had, you know, some of those experiences, that still does not take away from your sexuality, and that still does not take away from who you know that you are.
All right, so we have, I think, time for maybe 2 more questions. There's one in the chat that says, what can they do as a person who identifies as straight? What can they do to be an ally?
I can speak on that. I think understanding, being there when one needs you, and then also sharing with others that you are an ally. I think that's important. I think allies who speak up tend to create a stronger community support system and help us as LGBTQ also feel comfortable within these circles.
I would say start thinking about language, and language that is exclusive or gendered on a binary level, and language that is inclusive, or, you know, how can you have more open, you know, language, because, you know, a lot of things are characterized in just, you know, 2 gender binary and that's all that exists, but we know that there's more than that. And so it is also about, you know, how do you, kind of going back to some of the earlier question, how do you think about your socialization and relationship to gender and sexuality and just people in general, and how can you create more inclusive interactions with folks? And often that's through language. And so, you know, I often, you know, think like hey guys, people say that all the time, or, but how is that inclusive? Or how can we change, oh, that policeman is over there, police officer, just thinking about how language really kind of impacts people. And if we're using language that is more inclusive, then it allows for more individuals of diverse experiences to see themselves as valued and respected and recognized for who they are.
Yeah, I'll go next. So I think listening and voting, but also just paying attention to what's going on too. So whether that's in pop culture or politics, even for the people who are like, I'm not really into politics. Well, some of these laws and policies are affecting the people that you want to be an ally to. And so the best thing that you can do is show up for us. It might be a little bit uncomfortable for you. And also know that there's just so many different ways to be an ally. So it's not just like, do this and it's going to be great. Some people in the community don't want you to do certain things. Some people are completely for it, just recognizing and talking to people, exposing yourself to the community in a way that's not taking space, but rather sharing space and listening. That's really important too. Don't try to speak for the community. Maybe it's like, well, hey, I have a friend who identifies this and they've been expressing that they're feeling this way, or that they, enjoy when this happens. And so understanding that there's going to be so many different ways that people either expect you to show up an ally, appreciate the way you show up as an ally, and those are going to be different for different people. So asking even questions, but only to people that you're comfortable with. So I always get a little hesitant when I say, ask questions to people in the community, because I might be perfectly okay with you asking me a question, but that doesn't mean that someone else is going to be okay with that. I know plenty of people who don't want people to ask them questions, and that's perfectly okay. I like to educate and I like to talk about it, but again, I'm reflecting on my privilege as a cisgendered femme presenting woman who's typically can get away in any spaces so long as it's not gendered violence there. But when it comes to that, right? So reflecting on your own privilege and how you can show up, and it's going to look very different. But just listening and being open, educating yourself, knowing that you're going to be wrong, but that it's okay. Everyone's going to face a time where they're going to be wrong. And instead of overly apologizing for it or anything, just accept it, learn from it, and move on from it. Don't dwell on the mistake of if you do accidentally use someone's wrong pronouns, but you correct yourself and you acknowledge it. That's all we want, really, is that acknowledgement that, yep, you did a little bloop, but you can fix it. We don't expect like a grand old, today I used the wrong, like, no. If anything, like just like quietly do it and keep going, right? It's going to be different for different people, but no, you're going to make mistakes in being an ally, but we appreciate that you're showing up in the way that you can.
All right, so I have one final question before we wrap up. All right, I kind of want to go back to where we started. When we first started, we had a conversation about what empowerment means, right? And there was a whole lot of community, right? Community care, community empowerment. So I kind of wanted to end on that note, right? What advice would you provide to maybe some of our students or maybe folks who are kind of in their journey, right? Kind of navigate this part of their journey, kind of going over maybe some of the barriers that you all talked about in terms of like safety and coming out, right? What advice would you give to folks now who are trying to start their journey into self or community empowerment?
I can go. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do something. Don't let anyone shame you from into hiding who you are. And I want to go back to say one thing. Vote. I think you said that, Kayla. It's important. I think representation matters. You don't have to agree on everything, but we have to agree on one thing, which is we're all one community and we need to stand by each other and with each other.
I think I would say, as someone that also suffers from depression and anxiety, which can be common within the community, just how important it is to take care of yourself, to find those points of community, to find education and where you are validated and affirmed, because it does get better. It really does. It does get better. And I know it might not seem like that right now if you're a person that's going through your journey and it really feels crappy. I understand that, and I've been there and I felt that. But there is another side. There is the other side. And I hope that, you'll make it there because you're loved. We want folks in our community to continue to thrive. So, it does get better.
Yeah, and what, like, an emotional question, like, now I could feel like the emotions again. I said I was a person who feels a lot of feels, but I just, like, you matter, like you are valid, your experiences is valid, like your desires, your wants to live this certain life is so valid. And it sounds maybe like, I'm stating something that can't be possible, like, oh, just say you're valid, but repeating it to yourself and repeating it to your friends and your community is so important, because we have so many heavy things and people and structures and ways of life that are telling us that we don't matter, that there's one way to look at family, right? That there's one way to look at a relationship. There's one way to be professional in a career, right? Like, there's so many things that are constantly telling us that we're not valid. And so repeating it, like the self-affirmations, I've never really been a big follower of the self-affirmations, but I guess I do really, really stand by it, because if you tell yourself that you're not valid and that maybe, if you use the word that I'm crazy, or I don't know what I'm going through, and it's okay to process those emotions in a healthy way and talk to people about it, whether that's a professional or it's a friend or family or someone you confide in. Being able to express those emotions and really let them out, or process your emotions however you process them in a healthy way, is very, very important. But you matter, you're valid. Seek resources. As a student, if you're in the audience, you have resources. I can't express that enough, and take it from a student who did not use any resources in my undergrad, and I could have definitely benefited from some kind of first generation student or, queer identifying student centers. But visit the centers that Nat directs, visit those diversity centers and spaces. If you're a staff and you want to get involved in the alliances, be a part of and take advantage of these communities. While you certainly can find them outside of university settings, you're paying for these resources. It's embedded in your tuition. The mental health care on campus, the counseling, the medical services, right? Again, going back to those kind of services on campus, just really utilize them, because they're going to tell you that you're valid, and they're going to bring you that affirming space that we really, really do need as a community and just as individuals ourselves.
All right, well, thank you so much to our panelists for being with us today. I don't know about you, but I feel empowered. Just hearing y'all speak and sharing your stories. Thank you for being vulnerable and kind of sharing your journey with us today. Really appreciate that. I want to thank our partners in the President's Office, Alumni Engagement, and Government Relations for helping us put these panels on every month. We're also going to drop the evaluation for today. Folks can do that. And then I'm going to invite people to join us in our next Titan Table Talk. We have one in November, on November 9th at 11:30. And it's going to be on the empowerment of Native American Indigenous communities. So other than that, thank you so much. Don't forget, we're going to drop this on the YouTube channel for folks to watch. And I can't express how grateful I am to share space with y'all today, Nat, with their flag. Thank you, and take care, everybody. And we really appreciate you spending your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. You
Thank you. And thank you, Cecil.
Thank you.
Bye, Cecil. Thank you.
Take care,
Thanks, everybody. Great to meet you.